Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 9th online meeting of Madras Redford Doctors Foundation. Before we start, make sure that every one of you is muted so that there's no disturbance during the meeting. If you do want to speak, you can press on the space bar of your computer, laptop, and you should be able to address us. I'd like to welcome two new members to our foundation, Dr. Hariharan Govindaraj and Dr. Gangadharan Vadivelu. They both joined as members of our foundation this month. Dr. Hariharan Govindaraj, a 1968 graduate, had worked for the Indian Railways and retired as Chief Medical Director a few years ago. Dr. Gangadharan Vadivelu, a 1980 graduate, had worked as chest physician for the state government and retired recently. He is now working as HOD of Respiratory Medicine at Savita Medical College and Hospital. A warm welcome to both of you if you are present at this meeting. Now, coming to our meetings, we have had many important medical topics discussed at previous meetings. Most of them revolved around COVID-19 infection. The pandemic did take a lot of our attention. Although we are still not completely rid of the disease, we must move on and start looking at other things, perhaps focusing on the other day-to-day medical problems. Today, Dr. Arjun Rajagopalan is going to entertain us on a topic that I suspect has nothing to do with medicine. I think he's also going to teach us on how we should prepare and present a topic. 40 years ago, when we prepared for a meeting, we spent days laboriously preparing slides with all the data on it. If a mistake was noted, it would take another 24 to 48 hours to produce a new slide. Before the meeting, the slides were arranged in the correct order on a slide rack. You then took the precious collection to the meeting and handed it over to the technician or your assistant for them to project the slides. He will then load it onto the slide projector and either project it himself or hand you the remote for changing the slides yourself. There have been times when we've had disaster with the slides being in the wrong order or being placed upside down. The worst disaster that I have had is when the technician dropped the rack, spilling all the slides. I don't have to tell you about the confusion that followed the next. Anyway, all that has changed now, and we can create a presentation within 30 minutes using Microsoft PowerPoint. I suppose it is so easy to prepare a presentation today that we can prepare something in a hurry and cause death of the topic using PowerPoint. Is this what Arjun is going to talk about? I don't know. One of my guests today told me that she will be attending our meeting on murder by PowerPoint. I did correct her and said it is not murder by PowerPoint, but it is death by PowerPoint. I suppose one could feel like murdering the presenter if the presentation was terrible. Well, let us see what Arjun is going to tell us. I've already sent you a lot of information about Dr. Arjun Rajagopalan. We are all proud that he is a graduate of MMC. He is very talented and extremely popular speaker. I'm going to ask Dr. Kandasamy to say a few words about Arjun as he has known him for very many years. Dr. Kandasamy.
Friends, it gives me great pleasure in introducing our speaker for today, Dr. Arjun Rajagopalan. As you all know, it is not easy thing for a doctor to speak to fellow doctors on any topic and hold their interest, as there is a general, we know that already, feeling. It takes great oratorial skills, a mastery of language, a genius for humor, and an overall genuine sense of speaking from the heart makes a speaker special, especially for an eminent audience like this. I can confidently say that Arjun meets all the above criteria and more. I have known him for over the last 40 years as a friend, and more particularly as a gentleman who has reached out and given to the society again and again. His biodata is lengthy, and I will not go into the details, except that he has excelled in every stage of his career. First, as a Johnston medalist in MMC 1974, I'm sure most of you know, and later as a best outgoing resident in USA, and again at Sundaram Medical Foundation, which he helped to start and continues to inspire a new generation of doctors even today. Arjun is supported ably by his family, and his wife, Geeta Arjun, is also an eloquent speaker, much sought after the OBGYN circle. So friends, without much ado, I present to you Dr. Arjun Rajagopalan, who is going to talk to us on death by PowerPoint. Arjun.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanaswamy, for that nice introduction. And thanks also to Badri for inviting me to take part in this, what has now become a fairly regular ritual. You know, there was a long-standing tradition in medical colleges that the juniors always get ranked by the seniors. And this kind of setup has been going on now. This is the third or the fourth time that Badri and Kanaswamy have lined me up in front of a group of seniors and made me look like a fool. So, okay, the traditions have to be continued, I suppose. And so here we go. And as you rightly mentioned, I thought it would be nice to take a break from all the diseases and deaths and dying that we've been talking about and do something light. This basically is something that I have been kind of passionately involved with, because for the last 30, 40 years, there's one thing I have done consistently, which is trying to mentor and to teach young people. And among one of my duties there has always been going over their presentations, looking at what they do and what they put up. And over the course of time, I think that I have also helped shape many of them into good presenters. Now, without further ado, let me just get into the topic per se. Where do you go now? Share content. In my screen. Okay. Right. Can I be seen now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, fine. So the topic that I thought I would take and talk about is something that in the past, this is really not an original title, it's been described in the past as death by PowerPoint. And dying of PowerPoint is well known to be the number one cause of mortality in meetings and conferences. Poor doctors, even they die, at least wish they were dead when they were when they were forced through a whole bunch of poor presentations, and having been forced to listen can also be a very, very painful experience. Making a presentation at a conference is not a very, I'm sorry, I just lost the slide over there. Making a slide at a conference is not a very easy thing to do, because what you're trying to fight over, or what you're trying to overcome, is the fact that the audience is constantly bored and is trying to go to sleep. It's a fight between you and your audience as to who's going to get there first. It's been known well that if you start talking and you think you have about 100% of your audience's attention, within about 2 minutes or so, it would have dropped to around 25%. And by about 5 to 8 minutes, you virtually would have lost your entire audience. You no longer will be in charge of, wait a second, I'm having a hard time of your audience. So what we're going to talk about today is avoiding death by PowerPoint. And the lady who talked about murder by PowerPoint is also right, because a whole lot of murders get committed by the inappropriate or the untutored use of this very valuable presentation tool. So we'll share a few ideas on how to keep your audience awake and engaged when you're making a presentation. Let's take a few seconds now and do nothing except meditate on this picture. It's marvelous, isn't it? I mean, you don't need words. You absolutely don't need words to be able to make up a whole story out here. The contrast between this big, tall, white guy and those two small children. The fact that he is carrying equipment that probably is worth more than what these kids' parents make in 2-3 years. The fact that he is there as an invader in a country, and that these two children, so far that one of them doesn't even have footwear. And there is this terribly touching act of humanity going across between the two. To me, it looks like that little fellow with the hood is giving the soldier a fruit, an apple or a pomegranate or something. And you don't need words at all. You absolutely don't need words to be able to get the impact of this picture. It's been well known, and we always keep talking about the fact that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in this instance, it could be worth well more. What I'm getting at is fundamentally, we are all what are called visual thinkers. In terms of evolution, language came much further down. Language is symbolic, language is metaphorical, language is not direct. Whereas what we see and what we observe and make sense of what we see is much more direct. And both historically and for a long time, we've been visual thinkers. We think much better with images than with texts and words and concepts and ideas. With this in the back of our mind, we need to consider that whenever you're trying to make a presentation that will be remembered, you need 3 elements. You need to educate whomever you're talking to. And that's primary, especially when we're talking about professional lectures and professional meetings. The responsibility for education is primary. You also have to be entertaining. You have to, as we already said, you have to try and keep your audience awake for a few minutes or a half hour or so. And at the end of the day, you also have to be inspiring. You can't be each one of them alone, because if you're just educational and flat, you'll be considered a bore. If you're just entertaining without educating, people will think you're some kind of a showman or a clown. And if you're just inspiring without educating the audience or entertaining them, people will think you're some kind of a salesperson or an evangelist, or worse still, a politician. A memorable presentation has to be able to fuse all 3 together. A good educational message provided in an entertaining fashion, which leaves the audience inspired and wanting to go out and do something with what you've just told them. That's a difficult task. So traditionally, and as Badri already said in his introduction, the availability of presentation tools like PowerPoint, I use the word PowerPoint in a generic sense. There are so many other tools. This presentation is made on Apple Keynote. There are any number of tools available today for generating powerful graphics and presentations. And there is no dearth of tools and equipment that we have available. But what we forget, and the fundamental error that we all begin with, is that presentation tools are designed for images. They are not designed for text. Images are a powerful medium of communication and can carry across a whole lot more information than long chunks of text. And that's the first thing that you have to learn, is a presentation tool is a tool focusing on and using images. You have to be thinking visually. You have not to be thinking in textual form. I'd like to begin with some things that we need to forget forever. We all know that famous Clint Eastwood movie about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's look at the bad and the ugly and take a resolution that from here on, we're not going to be doing any of these at all. And in this list of ugly, bad things, the first thing that I utterly detest is using PowerPoint as a word processing tool, as a document processing tool, and not as this. When somebody throws up a slide like this, your first reaction is to put your hand on your head and say, "Ayo." This makes no sense at all. There's no way in the world that you can expect anybody to either want to or be able to look at a big block of text. Throwing up big blocks of text, which nowadays is very easy. All you got to do is cut and paste between your reference source and your slide, and you have this gigantic chunk of text. This is an absolute no-no. Your audience is lost forever. What you can do as a next step is you can break them up into small chunks of text, which we call bullets. But remember, bullets can kill, and this kind of bullet presentations using PowerPoint is absolutely not a healthy way of making sure that information goes across. And the most painful situation is that not only do you have these chunks of text as bullets, the speaker will insist on reading them word by painful word. Why the hell does he need to do it? I can read it. But that's so common, putting up big chunks of text and then going through them word by word. The next thing also is that all of a sudden, like children who are given a new toy, we now have access to a tool that has thousands and thousands of fonts. I mean, you can't even go through that list. There are that many. And like a child with a small toy, we tend to do this. We tend to show every piece of text on a different font, and it's not done. Design-wise, art-wise, it's not an elegant way to do things. And this kind of multiple use of fonts are something to be used like salt and seasoning. You just use just a pinch, just enough. Too much, and you will kill the whole dish. And then the other thing that these graphic tools also do very well is what I call bringing on the dancers. There are all kinds of text animations that you can use. You can make them type, you can make them flip, you can make them do all these crazy things. Again, this may look cute to you, but the audience will be focusing on the cuteness and not on the matter. And this kind of, using fonts just because they're there, or using animations just because they're there that you want to show off, is again, not the done thing. You will lose your audience. They will be focusing on the action and not on your words. If for any reason you need to be using these animations, and I'll show you some examples as we go along, be consistent. Do them for a reason, be consistent. So don't bring on the dancers. And what you run the risk of is that the medium becomes greater than the message. And that's, again, a very important pitfall. This is something that will really always put your audience to sleep. What's the point in projecting a table like this? Do you really think that in about 30 or 40 seconds, if the slides are going to be on, that anybody is going to be able to or even want to go through all these complicated numbers and try and make sense out of it? These kind of complex tables are the best sleep inducers in a talk. The moment you put it up, you lose your audience. It's well above the audience's visual compression, and I will come to strategies for handling this. Similarly, too, this is kind of an exaggeration. Presenting these kind of complex charts where, Lord knows where it's going. And in general, any chart or any flow that has more than 2 to 3 levels, the audience won't be able to follow. You don't use these kinds of complicated charts. They go well above the audience visual comprehension. Even if you're a visual thinker, there is a certain bandwidth to how much you can think visually, and this will be the response. And lastly, this is again something that I completely detest, the use of all these irrelevant graphics. And there's one where they show this little boy urinating into a pond, all that kind of stuff. And there's no meaning in all of this. And the moment you put these kind of things on your slide, your audience will watch that cat. They are not interested in you in any form of fashion. You've lost the audience. Graphics, if used, must be relevant to the message. You really are insulting the audience by telling them that you need all these little bells and whistles to hold their attention. So those are the things you don't absolutely ever do. If you were in the habit of doing them, forget it. Here's how you do a good slide presentation. You start, first of all, with making a determination of the number of slides for a talk. And there is a fairly simple formula that is used. You use about 1.25 to 1.5 slides for every minute of your talk. If you have a talk that needs to be 10 minutes, you can use 12 slides. And this kind of presentation is the one where you need the maximum effort, because you really, really have to make sure that every word, every picture, everything that you put in there carries weight. You have a 15-minute talk, it's still hard, but you could use a few more slides. You can go up to 18, 20-minute talks about 25, and 30-minute talks are the easiest of the lot, because you've got about 30, 40 minutes and they're a piece of cake. You can really throw in as much as you want, but be that as it may, the first thing you do is rigidly telling yourself that these are the total number of slides that you have allocated. That's the duration for your talk. And I think this is somewhere most people miss, because times out of number, you see somebody who's invited to give a 15-minute presentation and then he hands you a slide presentation with 86 slides. You know he's not going to go through all of that. And the end of it is going to be a big mess, because he's going to have to rush through. So time the number of slides, do this before anything else, and then don't change. Once you know the number of slides, what you then do is you make what's called a storyboard. And in a storyboard, regardless of whether you're using 12 slides or 30 slides, 4 slides are always constant. If you really want to capture the audience, you start first with a little story. We're all tuned, both by evolution and by culture, to like stories. The easiest way to grab an audience is to not come there and say, I'm going to talk about this, but just start off into a story, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Then there should be a slide on introducing the topic and yourself, an outline, and an exit slide. So of the 12 slides, 4 are fixed. So which means that if you're doing a 10-minute presentation, you have only about 8 slides to make your whole talk. And what you then do is that you write short headlines in each one of these storyboards. And storyboards are a tool that the advertising profession uses consistently. Anytime they make a presentation, anytime they make an ad campaign, the first thing they'll do is they'll do these hand-down storyboards. You have to have clarity in where you want to go, if you're able to, or if you want to get there promptly. Now, with that in mind, we'll look briefly at some little sizes that are used these days in slides. And classically, yeah, hello?
No,
okay.
You're listening.
Pardon me, am I something wrong?
No, nothing wrong. Carry on.
Okay, good. I thought I heard somebody say something. That's okay. So the classic slide presentations, the ones that, Badri was talking about when we started and all, were those 4x3 standards, 4x3 across. But of late, we have been switching over to this little wider format called a 16:9. And if you are just looking at it, look at the screen in front of you, look at your mobile phone, look at your computer, you'll find that they're all no longer on the 4x3 orientation. They're all switched to the 16:9 orientation. It's mobile friendly. It allows a little more formatting, and I'll show you some advantages as you go along. So this is something that I have been advising people, is to get away from the 4x3 and think of using a 16:9. This is also very convenient, like if you're going to convert your slide presentation into any sort of a movie or put it up on YouTube, the 16:9 is a native format for all those presentations. So this is a little bit more of a modern format. Now, what we're talking about is essentially this. When you use a 16:9, as you're seeing now, it allows splitting the entire visual frame into 2 frames. The large one on the right side, you can use for a graphic, and the one on the left side, you can use for supplementary text. There's no rigid stance on all of these things. You can switch them around. You can do some moving around, but the thing to understand is that the 16:9 format gives you much more elegance in terms of arranging visual information. And the whole presentation and what I'll be showing you subsequently is all on a 16:9. From here, we move to what really matters, and that is the content. What is it that you're going to say, or what is it that you want to say to your audience? And when it comes to content, it's universally acknowledged that the best way to begin would be with a story. We all love listening to stories. And when you start with some sort of a story, your audience relaxes. They have the feeling that here is a guy who's not an academic who's going to come and flood us with numbers and statistics, but here's a guy who's like us. He lives life. And as far as medicine is concerned, we are fortunate because we have any access to any number of stories. The story can be a clinical picture. The story can be a case study. And bring that in. You start off by saying things like, use it to begin by saying, we're looking at this 30-year-old male who presented with yak, blah, blah. And then what you can do is also use the tool to label all the necessary parts. They are what are called these call-outs that are easily available. And they are very nice, convenient ways of pointing out areas of interest on the slide. And if you want, you can reinforce it with a little bit of text. So a story is a good way to begin with. A story could be a case study, it could be anything. But begin with a story and you will have the audience kind of with you, okay? Now, once the audience knows, hey, this guy is okay, I think we can listen to him, then you bring in the title of the talk, then you bring in all the details like the presenter, the institution that you come from, who you are, and so on and so forth. And you're much more likely to have the audience remember you. The traditional way is always by going up on stage, throwing the first slide and say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, the title of my talk today is. That is so prosaic, that's so boring, that kind of, you're already switching off your audience. So wake them up with a story and then tell them who you are. Start with a roadmap of your talk. It's always nice to let your audience know what you're going to say ahead of time. A small introduction will be followed by several items. Usually is a good rule to not exceed 3 to 4 items in a 10 to 12-minute talk, or in any talk for that matter. The human brain is not capable of retaining much more than that. You give them the outline of the talk, and then you tell them that you'll be leaving them with some take-home messages. I always do this. This is an essential part of any presentation. If nothing, the audience at least knows how much more of the torture they have to put up with. They know that, at least that when we have reached item number 3, we probably have only one more chunk to go. So give them an outline, be nice to them, and guide them as to where you're going to be going. Now, when you're depicting information, and this is where the real challenge lies, is because people have come to hear or to listen to what you have to say. And when you're deciding or you're making a slide, you have to consider 5 simple questions about the content, about what the matter is going to be. And these are the classic 5 questions that any journalist or any writer will tell you is a good place to begin with. If your main issue is what, you're going to tell them about what something is, start with a picture. We've been repeatedly reinforcing that it is a much easier task for you to show people things about what you're talking about. And today is the age when getting access to pictures is the easiest thing on earth. Either from your own collection or from some collection, you can get it. Now, if the slide is going to talk about how something is done, particularly in terms of a flow chart, they use a flow diagram. And flow diagrams, again, as I will show you, have to be relatively simple. You can't have more than 2 or 3 levels of hierarchy, and you can't get too complicated. If you're going to talk about the flow of events along a time frame, that you're going to say that this is how a disease would progress, or this is how something went along, then you use what's called a timeline. If you want to talk about quantities, you use charts and tables in the same way. If you want to make comparisons, charts and tables are a useful method. And here again, I'll show you some rules. And if you want to talk about people or personalities or places, show pictures again. So the emphasis constantly is minimize text, maximize pictures. People will be able to get more information from pictures which are well thought out and well done than from blocks of text that you just cut and pasted from somewhere. It's a little more work, no question at all, but it makes the whole presentation so much more meaningful and valuable. Here's an example. if you're talking about something like what, like, it could be anything. It could be an operative picture. It could be an instrument. It could be anything. It's just anything. You just find a good graphical element, give it a title, and then label all the important parts. As you talk, you go introducing these labels. And finally, if you want, you can also put in a line or two of text to tell people about what is it that you talked about. So this is a very, once again, notice that the 16:9 framework allows you to do this very nicely. This is how you handle with what's. When you're talking about how and why, this is a point in time where the power of presentation graphics and their ability to animate. Hello.
Somebody's
talking. Am I okay? Can I go?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Okay. It looks like somebody really gasped or something, and I thought I had killed somebody. Okay. We're talking about this. Animation tools are they're very simple, easy to learn. And I'll show you an example. Now, I'm talking about, like, say you want to talk about how you do a randomized controlled trial. And this is how you can say that. You say you start with an accessible population, you put in inclusion and exclusion criteria, and at the end of it, you get what's called an intended population. That is a segment of your accessible population. With the intended population, you now randomize using some kind of a methodology. You randomize and you allocate your patients to one of two groups, one who will be the control and the other one will be the study. And in both groups, you look at outcomes, you compare outcomes to see whether there is or isn't a difference. Now, isn't this a nicer way of doing this than just putting it as lines of text? You can evolve the whole process. You can bring in graphical elements, and you leave the person with a much better idea of what you're talking about than if you just went through it with lines of text. This is easily possible. It's not anything that you need to attend a course or anything. If you play around with the animation tools that are available in any of these presentation graphics, these are very, very easy to create. You just need a little imagination, a clear idea of where you're going to do or where you're going to go, and you will find that you can do much more effective visual presentations. When you're making comparisons, the usual way we do this is always tables, right? The tables are the easiest way in which you can show columns of information. But here again, unlike that table that I showed right in the beginning, the general rule is don't exceed a 4x4 or a 3x4 table. If you put in more information, you'll lose your audience. They won't be able to keep up with you. And if you're presenting them, PowerPoint or all these graphic presentations have these nice features where instead of throwing the whole table at the patient, at the audience, and then leave them floundering, you can expose them line by line. As you talk about the items, you can bring it out line by line. And if there is any specific item that you would like to highlight that and just give it as a label. Now, such a table is easy to grasp, meaningful, and is far more likely to retain the interest of your audience. So creating tables, almost never use tables directly. Don't cut them out from books. Ask yourself, what is the important element of this table that I can reduce? Create simple tables, emphasize the important parts of the table, and then bring it out. You'll find that, again, it's a far more elegant way of showing data. Similarly to comparisons, we're very fond of doing is with graphs. And here again, don't do all those complicated three-dimensional, three-depth, multi-values and all that kind of stuff. You confuse people. The simplest graphs to use and still by far and away the most effective are your bar charts. And animation graphics, again, allow you to do things like introducing them value by value. You don't throw the whole thing, you can value by value, and then you can say, hey guys, I'm showing you this. Now, this is the what I'd like to point your attention to. You can do the same thing with pie charts. And actually, for most presentations, between bar charts and pie charts, you don't need much else. Everything else is too complicated and everything else is kind of likely to lose your audience. So here you have a way of showing comparisons simply using simple, flat graphics. But use the graphics with the animation so that you can produce, you can lead your audience into the data as you are talking, okay? If you're talking about something evolving over a course of time, then you use what's called a storyline. And a storyline basically isn't anything except a bar graph that shows the progression of time. Traditionally, time is always shown as progressing from left to right. I really don't know why we can't do it the other way, but it always goes left to right. And then you can say by that such a date, such a thing happened, and then we moved along, something else happened, and then the whole evolution or the whole course of a particular, if you want to show it as as an evolutionary thing, this can also be done much more effectively. Rather than blocks of text, here is a visual representation of something moving along. There are many ways of doing this. You can take a calendar and then from the calendar, point out the various things that happen, link graphics with this. There is no limit at all. But the thing is, keep thinking visually. Think in terms of images, not in terms of blocks of text. So those are the 5 major ways in which we will use them. And that's about whenever you're giving a talk, whatever you say will be reducible to one of those 5 elements. Once in a while, when you need to talk about somebody or a person, put up a nice picture of them, say who they were, and, same thing again. Use labeling of the graphics in a nice fashion, and you'll find that visually, this will give you a lot more impact than just, leaving it as words. If you must, and only if you must, you can resort to your bullet lists. If you notice so far, I have not talked about text or bullet lists because I think that's the challenge. Learn to make presentations without bullets. If you need to use lists, then as a last resort, what you also need to do is use words or short phrases, not full sentences like we saw earlier on. We don't need that. Preferably use only keywords, something that will trigger off a line of thought without going through the whole sentence or the whole explanation. If you need to emphasize within a phrase, use contrast. Show what you want to show with a little bit of contrast. And like I have been doing now, when you need to show these lists, don't throw them all on the screen at one time. If you do that, what your audience will do is they will read ahead of you and then go to sleep. So be a little tricky, have these cards up your sleeve and then show them just one at a time. And it's very easily done. You've got to put in a setting for the animation and say, let me show them one by one. So you have the audience with you if you need to do something of this nature. Never more than 4 or 5 bullets. Never. If you crowd a slide with more information, once again, you will lose people. You will completely, they won't have any idea what you're trying to say. If you have to use text, like we just saw, it's also important that you make a consideration of background. The best way of demonstrating text is a dark background with light text, either the black and white that you saw or the dark blue and white. As an option, you could also do this, where you're talking about a light background with a dark text. The 2 things you never do are the opposite. If you have a dark background and you use dark text on it, it can't be read. Absolutely cannot be read, and it's a terrible way of demonstrating information. The same way, again, use a light background with light text, your audience will struggle. Times out of number, I see people missing this. They go through all the time and trouble of creating a slide, and then you find out that it's not readable because you didn't look at something as simple as the background versus the foreground to be able to see text well, and this is important. Again, if you're using text, you need to use fonts. Don't get carried away and try to show off, how many fonts you have on your presentation graphic. In general, don't use more than 2 fonts. You decide on one font for the heading, which could be anything. You could be serif or it could be a sans serif font, but stick with it. Make the headings a little larger, and then you decide on another font. If this one is a serif font, then the other font could be a sans serif. And like if this is Times, this could be Arial or Helvetica or one of the sans serif fonts. But again, it's not critical. What is critical is that you choose one for each of these elements, one for the heading, one for the body text, and stick with it. Don't keep on playing around. I cannot handle the prospect of people who put up slides in which every slide is in a different font. Drives me crazy. It's inelegant, it's poor design, and it's not done. So very, very minimal. Minimalism as far as fonts are concerned is the way to go. So the take-home messages for the day will again have to be shown as a slide, and that's your last slide. This is one area where you will necessarily have to be using text. But the point is that by now you hope that your audience has been following through with you. You give them a quick recipe for what you want them to do. Again, 4 or 5 lines, and a take-home slide is always essential. It tells the audience that, this is what you're aiming to do. So we started off by saying that memorable presentations need 3 elements. They need to be educational, primarily. They need to entertain, and they need to inspire. And it's your challenge as somebody speaking in a public forum is to be able to put all 3 together. And putting all 3 together is much, much easier in today's terms because you have so many tools available at your disposal. Gone are the days when Badri started. I remember those horrors when you had your slide tray fully loaded and the guy tripped and fell over it. And in these slides, like there were days when you used to do what are called lit slides, and you used to hand tint all the colors and all that. And then finally, after all of that, the projectionist wouldn't work or the bulb will fuse, all those days are gone, and you have in our hands today enormously powerful tools for making effective presentations. These are 2 sites that I would like to leave you with, Pixabay and Unsplash, and they are a fantastic, almost inexhaustible source of graphics like this. The one you're seeing right here is from there. All the graphics on both these sites are royalty-free. They have been donated by people. You can use them, if necessary, by giving credit. But even that, they don't resist. And between the 2 of these, there's no more excuse for being not able to illustrate your presentation with appropriate graphics. You can freely access all of them for your graphical sources. So just for ideas, you'll be quite surprised as to the number of ideas you can get by just putting in a keyword and thumbing through all of them. The great man said, make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think that's the challenge about making effective presentations. Thank you all for your patient listening, and I hope that this was worth your time and effort. So let's get back to wait a second, I've lost my...
Yeah. If you come off the...
there you go, I'm back on. Right.
Share. Right, okay. Arjun, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. Mind you, most of us here... can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know that I can be seen.
Let me just...
I'm having a little bit of a problem with... Yeah, there you go. Stop the sharing. Okay, there we go. Right.
Yeah, right. Arjun, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
What most people don't realize today is that most of the audience today are retired people, and many of us have stopped giving lectures and presenting slides. Perhaps your presentation today would initiate people to come forward and talk to us through our Zoom meetings.
No, that's not true, but because just because you're no longer making talks or presentations doesn't mean that you need to stop. There are other forums. There are so many times when you, if nothing, next time you hear somebody talking, it will give you the ability to look at it with a much more critical eye. In the sense that, is this guy really sending across information in an effective fashion? And I think that what we looked at is kind of a short checklist of things that, that can be used. I think it's like saying that you're tired of looking at paintings. Do you ever get tired of looking at paintings? Do you ever get tired of listening to watching movies, listening to music? No, it's the same thing. It's just another good quality presentations are just another creative form. And I think you never really outgrow them. So that was the reason why I was a little hesitant about the topic. But then on the other hand, I didn't know what else that I could talk about.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. We had a very enjoyable evening. What I would like to do is Dr. Raghunandan, who is professor of medicine at MMC, he is in charge, and I think he would probably be in touch with a lot of students at MMC. And those students and the postgraduates would need this kind of information for them to present, properly at meetings. And so if we can persuade you to give a talk to them once, and I'll try and arrange it through our Zoom meeting. I'm going to be meeting the dean of the MMC, and then perhaps we will arrange for them to come on to the meeting. And if you could give a talk like this to them, it would be most useful for the audience. Having said that, you have proved once again that you are a very talented person who's able to do anything, not just medicine, but outside of medicine. And your the website and the blogs that you run are most interesting. And what I'm going to do is to create an address of your webpage and your blog on our forum so that other members will be able to appreciate what you are doing for the rest of society. Thank you very much again.
That will be wonderful. Yeah.
If I can ask the audience if they have any questions, what they can do.
My classmate Rekha is raising her hand.
Right. They can press on the space bar and talk.
Where do I speak? Where's Mama?
Oh, there you go. Hi, Rekha.
Hi, Arjun. Delighted to listen to your talk. And I agree, many of us, or most of us, are retired. But I would agree with you. There is always an opportunity to make a presentation. I think many of us now have got time for hobbies. And I think involvement in those hobbies and different circles of society is going to give us plenty of opportunity. So thank you very much for that. It was very helpful. And I'm sure the younger ones would certainly benefit from your talk.
Thank you. And I'm sure that the Royal College Vice President also could be able to pick up a few points. I see him looking over your shoulder. And Rajesh.
Arjun, thank you very much. I'll change the way I speak from now onwards. I'll put up a lot of pictures of myself every time I make a presentation.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you. I mean, that was, quite informative. And I agree with you that, putting in a lot of text to explain to any audience, for that matter, is a waste of time, because most of the kids who come to listen to you have already looked at what you're going to say, and they've referenced what you're going to say.
Yeah.
So there's no point in putting in stuff which have been, cut and paste from all of these articles, because they know about it.
Right.
So they come with questions. And I think the most important message that you said is to give a story, is to give an outline of what you're going to say. And the most important bit is in the end, the take-home message that you're going to have to take away. So thank you very much.
Welcome. Good to see both of you. There is actually, if I may comment, there is a very carrying this whole issue about how to make presentations in the course of our institution. We all know Jeff Bezos, right? I mean, there's nobody in this world who doesn't know Jeff Bezos. Bezos has a very interesting way of conducting meetings. Rule number one in this meeting, no PowerPoint. You're not allowed presentations of any sort. What you have to do before a meeting is, create a 4 to 6 page document, clearly outlining what it is that you want to say, right? And this document, interestingly, is not circulated ahead of time, because he says that if you give it, people will say, yeah, I read it, and they never really did. So what Bezos then does is he brings in all the people who meet for the meeting, gives each one of them a copy of the document there, and then gives him 20 minutes to read while he is watching. Can you believe that? And apparently, at the end of 20 minutes, now he says, all of us are on the same level playing field. We have the same kind of information. We all know what the presenter wants. Go ahead and discuss. And apparently his meetings are so productive. You can't argue with him. The guy has got more money than than God. But apparently his meetings are very famous. He's well known for it. That he's one person who will not allow PowerPoint.
Arjun, you having said that, somebody else told me that most of these meetings, if you have an interactive session, that creates more discussion rather than a meeting presented by one person.
Absolutely. But then it takes a lot of effort. To create a half-hour interactive session that is truly able to get to an objective requires enormous effort. It's not easy at all. Whereas it's very easy to just cut and paste from some few places, throw it into a slide and say, here's my talk. No, it's very difficult to create good quality interactive presentations. But they're much more effective, far more effective, where the audience participates entirely. And today you have devices where you can even signal your answers so that at every step of the way, you can take an audience poll. You can say, hey, we discussed this. These are the elements that need to be considered. How many of you think this is right, this is right, this is right? And the audience clicks. The moment they click, the entire statistics come on directly. So you not only know what the speaker is saying, you also know what the audience thinks about what the speaker is saying in real time. Those require a lot of preparations, but the days are gone when when didactic lecturing with just a flat essay without participation and without some real element of getting feedback, those days are really gone. I think that the whole, and we've learned in the last 1 year that many of the things that we thought were absolutely necessary for teaching and education aren't. There are so many ways of keeping yourself smart and up to date without having to. This Zoom meeting, for instance, we wouldn't have thought about it a year ago, but now it's become the standard way of doing business.
Also, it's brought in a lot of us together.